Celebrated Guinean writer Camara Laye begins chapter 4 of his award-winning autobiography, The African Child, with a description of the practices and rituals observed by the people in his village before their annual rice harvest. His account doesn't say much about the beliefs his people have about rice, but the crop has a long enough history in West Africa. I found myself wondering what folklore has to say about it. So, in today's episode, we are serving up a hot plate of rice folklore, West African style. Hello, friends, and welcome to the Mythological Africans podcast, where we read and talk about stories from African mythology and folklore. I am your host, Helen Nde. I remember feeling really happy as I read Camara Laye's description of the rice harvest. Happy because I learned something about an African community that I didn't know before, but also and especially because it involved rice. Now, if you know me, you know I absolutely love rice. It's my happy meal and the one thing I'd probably be okay eating for the rest of my life every day. Rice and beef stew, chicken stew, fish stew, they will always be famous as far as I'm concerned. And if you don't know what janga rice or coconut rice are, I apologize sincerely for the culinary joy you are missing out on. Did I mention jollof rice? No? All right. Take a tomato-based sauce, right? Seasoned with salt and onions and peppers and other spices, and then add some rice and water and then let it cook and complicate it further with veggies. I prefer carrots and green beans. And then crown it with whatever kind of meat strikes your fancy, beef or seafood preferably. I mean, you have not lived until you've tasted some variation of jollof rice. It is that deep. Matter of fact, last night, after thinking about this episode all week, I dragged myself away from a book I was thoroughly enjoying because I had a sudden craving for, and so I had to cook myself a pot of jollof rice. Now, if you spend any time at all in West African social media spaces, you invariably will stumble into one of the jollof rice wars battlegrounds. And this is a long-running conflict between West African people, mainly from Ghana and Nigeria, each touting their version of this spicy, savory, and just absolutely delectable rice dish as the best. Personally, I'm from Cameroon, and nous les Camerounais, we are confident enough in the precise deliciousness of our jollof rice. We generally adopt a Swiss attitude to this war, right? But that the war exists at all and has raged loudly enough in the annals of African social media to attract coverage from the international press tells you something about how important rice is to people from that part of the continent. So Chinese fried rice might dominate the global gustatorial imagination, but West African rice dishes is where it's at, jollof rice in particular. And they're simply in a class of their own. As the saying goes, a party without jollof is just a meeting. A large proportion of the rice currently grown and consumed in Africa is the Oryza sativa species, which was imported from Asia in the 1500s. But Oryza glaberrima, which is the African species of rice, and, Oryza sativa, they have a long and storied history on the African continent's western coast. And this goes beyond jollof rice being named for Jollof, the historic Senegambian kingdom, which flourished between the 15th and the 18th century. Archaeologists have actually found evidence of domesticated rice in Mali, which could date as far back as 300 years before Common Era. So it's like almost 3,000 years ago, right? And scholars are divided on how, Oryza glaberrima, which is the indigenous African rice variety, moved from a wild grass to a domesticated plant. But it's believed that it was domesticated in the Niger River Delta area before spreading along the West African coast. And according to some oral traditions among the Mende in Sierra Leone, who are possibly the African continent's most prolific consumers of rice, elephants spread the undigested rice seeds along the land in their dung as they migrated from place to place. The origins of Oryza sativa, that's the Asian species, there's some controversy about that too. Some scholars believe that it arrived with Muslim traders from the east with spices and goods which traveled along the Silk Road of old. And others believe it came on Portuguese ships or through non-human vectors like wind and migratory birds, which is all plausible. Either way, it came, it saw, and it conquered. Patterns of cultivation along the Rice Coast, that is the region from the Senegal River in present-day Senegal to Liberia, reveal a deep, deep understanding among the people on how to grow rice. There are 11 documented systems used to irrigate rice farms with the three main water sources, that's rainwater, groundwater, and tidal flow. And their practices even to sweeten the soil, as they say, to reduce the salinity so rice can grow on the coastal part of the region. And farmers develop techniques and specialized tools to grow the rice across different landscapes, whether it's the dry highlands or the wet mangrove coastal lands. And the vocabulary and farming songs and dances of people in these regions include specific rice growing and other rice related references. In some places, people were paid in rice as well as millet and other important crops or salt. And this rice growing knowledge and skill was so established, rice growing communities were often targeted during the transatlantic slave trade. Now, you can always tell how important a thing, be it a plant, an animal, an object, an idea, or a person, is to a people by the stories they tell about it. So, what does West African folklore say about rice? Among the Temne, who are found in Guinea and Sierra Leone, in a folktale about the creation of the first humans, the first man and woman go to the creator and complain that they don't have food to eat. So the creator gives them clean rice, that's rice without its husk, for them to eat. And then later on, the people, as humans are wont to do, sow or wash in rice, they start wasting it. So the creator sends someone to warn them to say, hey, if you keep wasting rice, I will send locusts and rats to devastate your fields if you don't behave yourselves and treat food with respect, which I can get behind that. In yet another story, reference is made to the sun of beating rice, not sun as in child, but sun as in solar body. The sun of beating rice, which is a time of the day when women begin beating rice to remove the husk as part of preparations for the evening meal. So what you see is it's baked into the folklore, into the mythology, but it's also the rice cultivation and consumption is also used to organize life, right? The Mende, for example, take rice very seriously. To them, a person has not eaten if the person has not eaten rice, and the only true farmer is the rice farmer. The Mende traditional calendar is organized around the planting and harvesting of rice. And as Zainabu Kallon, a Sierra Leonean cookbook also explains, if Jesus lived in Mende land, he would have said, I am the rice of life. Anyway, so rice is sprinkled across Mende culture and folklore, especially in stories about Castillo, the trickster spider who's, like all African tricksters, is characteristically defined by their endless hunger and they will do everything to get food, right? Castillo's antics are oriented towards getting more rice, even at the expense of his wife, children, and fellow animals. But the most interesting story I found about rice in Mende folklore is the story about how war came to mankind. And it started with rice. So the story goes that at one time there was a dance held in a big town called Mbembe. And there was a man named Pana, and he was a skillful dancer and he liked to dance. So he held a dance ceremony in Mbembe. And when the time came for the ceremony, a large crowd attended and many important people came and high statues, the chiefs of the land. And it happened that 8 very virile young men decided to go to this dance because they had heard about it. One of them was about to go, but then he went into the bush to do his work. He started working to cut the wild plants. He heard about the dance and then he stopped and went to the dance. He didn't finish his work. Another young man came, found a place where Ngelo had started cutting the brush and it was dry and it was beautiful. And he stood there, was like, well, who started this work? And then didn't finish the work of felling the trees. So he pushed away the dry weeds that had been cut the trees, but then he left it too and went to the dance. Another man came by, saw the bush that had been pushed away, the trees that had been felled, but then the stuff that was left over had not been burnt away. So he decided to burn it. But then he too got distracted and decided to go to the dance. Another man came, saw that the farm had been cleared and the dried leaves and twigs burned, but then it had not been brushed and cleared. So he started working on that, but then he also decided and went to the dance. And so it continued through all the process of traditionally making a rice farm. And what's great about the story is that you hear how the Mende people went about making their rice farm. Another person came and planted the rice. Another person came and weeded the rice. Another person came and harvested the rice. But then they all started the work, left it, and went to the dance. Another person came, drove away the birds. Another person came and put it in the granary, threshed it. Basically, different people did the different bits of work and then abandoned it and went to the dance. But then the dance ended, right? And everybody was like, oh, cool, we started our work. Let's go back and finish our work. But then they got there and everything had been done. The granary for the rice had been built and the rice had been stored. But then every single person remembered doing a bit of work on that farm. So it was a question of who does this rice belong to? And as they started quarreling amongst themselves to figure this out, that is how war came to the people. There are many stories which feature rice as a crop grown and consumed by people as a staple or as a street for special occasions. And in these stories, nothing particularly special is said about the rice itself, right? Like in the Mende story, in the Temne story. But the fact that it regularly shows up in the farms and the bowls of folklore says enough. And just as with tea and the Tuareg, which we talked about in last week's episode, refusing to consume what everybody consumes is a sure sign of possibly malicious orderness. And this is the case for Debo Engal, who is an evil sorceress. And she refuses to eat rice and cassava or yams, and that did not endear her to the people. Meanwhile, in a Hausa folktale, a king's son eats and then vomits up black rice and white rice and many other kinds of food in a competition to show the abundance in his father's house. But he is still bested by a poor man's son who vomits up silver. In another Hausa's tale, sorting out rice from beans is one of the impossible tasks that a wicked king gives a young man as a way to trick him out of his good fortune. But ants, which the young man had befriended, come to his aid and they help him sort the rice from the beans overnight. Ants also help Kamba, a Temne folk hero, to separate rice from millet seeds in time to survive the king's wrath. So similar tales from different people. And then there is this story from the Wolof people in Gambia where a young woman chooses to marry a young man who was savvy enough to realize that no reasonable woman would serve benachin, which is a rice dish similar to jollof rice, without meat. So what she did was she made a big bowl of benachin and hid all the meat at the bottom. So her other suitors come and sit down and they eat and you're like, what is this? How would she serve us rice without meat? So they say not so great things about her and then leave her there. And this guy's sitting there like, this does not make any sense. So he waits for all the others to leave and he goes and scrapes to the bottom of the bowl and there he finds the hidden treasure. So we are scraping the bottom of our bowl of rice here, but the good African child in me knows to save the best for last. That last piece of meat, that last crunchy spoonful of carrots and green beans, we're right there. In the episode notes, you will find a link to Zainabu's African cookbook with food stories. And Zainabu is the Sierra Leonean cookbook author who I mentioned earlier. And it's not a new book. It's been around since 2004, I believe. But it has 30 pages worth of rice recipes and stories. So you definitely want to check this one out. And you can also read up on the origins of the Jollof Rice Wars and more about how this classic West African meal brings people on the internet together in just the best ways. Just don't pick a side until you've tasted them all. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you all next week.